Green is sus. Are you the imposter? Today we're going to be talking about the strange phenomenon of imposter syndrome. So, imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has this persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud, so an imposter. Um, so, it doesn't matter if there's external evidence of their competence or any of that. It's the people experiencing this imposter syndrome are just convinced that they're frauds and that they don't deserve what they've achieved or the accolades or anything like that. Um, Individuals with this will incorrectly attribute this their accolades or their success to like luck or interpret it as them deceiving people into thinking they're more intelligent than they are. Um, but it's also apparently it's a pretty normal human to human it shows up in human to human relationships as well. um, and it it might be a defense mechanism for it's an individual defense mechanism that's considered difficult to achieve. Makes it difficult to achieve healthy relationships. So there's some early research focused on how prevalent this is. And it seems like it affects men and women pretty equally. Um, so I, I have an interesting story about the idea of imposter syndrome and how this can crop up, and I think a lot of people will probably have a similar story. Um, so in my field, I work in information technology. I'm a software developer. So the idea of imposter syndrome comes up quite a bit, and I think the reason is because no matter how skilled you are at being a software developer, the amount of information and new technologies that's coming out is a constant flow of new and improved things, and you have to constantly stay on the cutting edge so that you feel like you are to benefit of a company. Because to be honest, you have to be a certain level of um, competency. You have to be a certain you have to know certain things. You have to kind of stay up on the cutting edge stuff, or you're not going to get that job at Amazon. You're not going to get that job at Microsoft or whatever. And Or keep that job. And I think that especially in the IT field, because there's this huge like amount of information that you need to remember and be not just aware of but knowledgeable on, that's constantly cutting edge. And there's always some young person who's just coming out of school who learned that new technology in school that's coming out, and the company might snatch them up. And then you, being the person that has been like there in the trenches but didn't have the time on in their outside, free time, because you have a family, you can't study that outside the 8 hours that you're at work, because you just don't have the time. You get left behind, and you're afraid that the up and comer is going to take that position or those new positions because they learned that new hot technology in school and stuff. So you're constantly worried about not having enough knowledge for the a new job, a new position, or even a new project that comes in. Because sometimes a new project comes in and you're like, I don't even know that technology. Like, but they're like, okay, make it work, kind of thing. And I think there's this fear of not having that knowledge, and this idea of being found out. You're like, oh, I mean, I'm like, I don't know, 12 years into my career now, and I still have this feeling. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, and they're going to catch on eventually, but I do know what I'm doing. But there's um, that little like devil on the shoulder idea that it's just like, hey, you have no clue. You don't know what you're doing. They're going to find out. They're going to find out, and you're going to lose your job. It's over, man. They caught on, you fraud. And that right there is the imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter what accolades you have, what papers you've published, what projects you've put out. You have this psychological, I don't want to call it a dysfunction, it's a psychological like framework that's like just afraid that you don't know what you're talking about, and somebody's going to catch on and expose you. Um, and I think it goes past the IT, the idea of like the IT world and stuff, and I'm sure it applies to lots of other jobs, like skilled labor jobs and stuff like that. Where you're just like, I don't know how I made it here, and eventually people are going to catch on that I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. But the real truth is, nobody knows what the heck they're talking about, right? Like, we're all learning on the fly. We're all trying to develop and become better all the time. But I think that there's this unreasonable expectation that we've put on ourselves that we have to know everything. Yeah, like, for our specific job, it's like we should be like the subject matter experts, and even when you are called the subject matter expert, when you're not listened to, like if you as a subject matter expert, sometimes it'll be your job to tell like the uppers or the executives like, oh, well, I don't think this is a good idea because X, Y, and Z. And because you're the subject matter expert, you think, well, they're going to listen to me. And then they don't. And you're like, that imposter syndrome kicks in again. And it's like, maybe you don't know what you're talking about and they're catching on. And that's why they're not listening to your expertise, because you don't have any, right? Like, I mean, it's like there's all these different scenarios where this imposter syndrome comes up. And another I'm pretty sure this would count as imposter syndrome as well, is well, at least it would count as these unreasonable expectations that we put on ourselves that cause imposter syndrome. So when I went to high school, I did really well. I was a pretty studious kid. I did my homework, even if I didn't like it, and I got good grades. And I did a program called Running Start, which puts you in community college in your junior and senior year and pays for it. You have to meet certain thresholds for them to accept you and stuff. It's not that difficult to get in. If you've got decent grades, you can get in. But I was like, hey, 2 years of free college, I'm in, So I did that, and I did decently in community college. I mean, there's one or two classes that I struggled in, but nothing terrible outside of one exception. That I don't think was entirely my fault. I think that the professor was a particularly mean individual. Oh, hey, we have a guest. Are you the imposter? No? But the the issue was that I did really well in community college, and minus that exception, and I went off to university, and it was completely different. And the professors didn't they didn't want to put themselves out there and help you the way that you might need help. And I didn't quite understand how the university system worked in respect to getting help with struggling with topics, like, with your work, with your schoolwork. I thought that because things came to me really easily in high school and somewhat easily in community college, that it would probably be the same in university. If I just read that book, if I just read that, did the homework, I would get it, right? Because I'm doing the work. Like, that's all it took in high school. That's all it took in community college, was do the work, and I'll do okay. I'll figure it out. But by the time I got to university, that wasn't the case. I wasn't just learning things by doing the work, and I was struggling. And like I said, I didn't know what resources were available. They weren't very, back then, they weren't very clear on where to find resources. And I fell into the imposter syndrome kind of scenario where I called myself the imposter. I was like, I shouldn't be here. I am not smart enough for this, and I made a bad decision by coming to school because I'm not doing well and I don't know what to do. So it was kind of a similar situation to the imposter syndrome, except for I'm the one who thought I was, that found out that I was the imposter. I kind of sabotaged myself. And I actually left school because I wasn't doing very well. And it wasn't for a few years of working just not odd jobs, but like working in different fields, and eventually getting into IT, where I decided to go back, and then I did really well at that point. Hey, we have a guest again. Hey, bud. But he's showing off. The point is that the second time I went back, I had a better understanding of what it means to ask for help and how to do so. And I wasn't going to fall for that imposter syndrome to myself, anyways. So just an interesting story on like how self doubt can cause you to sabotage yourself because you are suffering from that imposter syndrome of like I shouldn't even be here, but don't play with that. But sorry guys, the cat is walking back and forth in front of the mic. But the idea that is that you can sabotage yourself by having this imposter syndrome, and I think I sabotaged myself by in college by having this problem and not realizing what it was or how to deal with it. So apparently this idea of imposter syndrome comes from a 1978 article titled "The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women: Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention" by a Dr. Clance and a Dr. Imes. So they defined it as an individual experience of self-perceived intellectual phoniness, also known as fraud. And that goes back to my school example of I thought I was like I shouldn't even be at university. I'm too dumb for this because it wasn't just coming to me. It was a self-perceived phoniness. So the researchers it kind of investigated this prevalence of an internal experience by interviewing, I think it's like 150 women, I think, and all the participants had been like recognized by their colleagues as excelling and having academic achievements through their degrees and testing scores, and so like measurable things that showed that they were smart and accomplished people. But they still doubted themselves despite that external validation. So that's where this idea of imposter syndrome came from. So the participants basically were like, "Oh, it was just luck, or somebody's just overestimating my ability." Clance and Imes believe that this is just the framework that people put on themselves that forms this imposter phenomenon. And then they kind of like looked into it further. At first, they were like, "Oh, well, maybe it's something with women in particular, like high achieving women." But as they looked into it, it turned out that at first they were like, "Oh, it's less prevalent in men." But further research was like, "Oh no, it definitely it's happening there too in pretty large numbers." So the If you noticed a cut there, it was because the cat wanted out of the room. So they explain the imposter phenomenon can be distinguished by 6 dimensions: the imposter cycle, the need to be special or the best, characteristics of Superman, Superwoman, a fear of failure, denial of ability, and discounting praise, and a feeling of fear and guilt about success. They said that it kind of varies from individual to individual on what's feeding the out of these 6 things, what's feeding the imposter syndrome. But to be imposter syndrome, at least 2 of those aspects have to be present. But apparently this phenomenon is pretty common. It's been estimated that it's like 70% of people, that at least 70% of people will experience the signs and symptoms of this imposter syndrome at least once in their life. For some people, they feel like this all the time, probably. And it can be like there's a couple different triggers for it. It could be a new academic or professional setting. I know that sometimes when you take a new job or a new when they say academic setting, like let's say a new class in school or in my line of work, a whole new project comes in that's like beyond what you've done before, you can kick in there because it's this new thing that you're like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Um, it says that research also shows that the imposter phenomenon is not uncommon for students who enter a new academic environment. That's a perfect example, perfect highlight of what I was saying earlier. When I went to university, it was a whole new academic, environment, and I felt like I should not be there. And these feelings of insecurity can come as a result of that unknown and that new environment, and that leads to low self confidence and low belief in their own abilities. So again, that's that school example of mine again. I felt like I didn't belong there. I was an imposter because of this new environment and the way it worked. I didn't know what to do, and it was like low confidence and low self confidence and a lack of beliefs in what I was able to accomplish, to the point where I was like, I'm out, and I withdrew from school. That only took like 2 quarters. I was out by like winter quarter, and I was because I by then I felt like I had done, and this is probably the low self confidence as well. I felt I had done too much damage to my academic record, that I was going to ruin my future if I kept going. So I was like, I'm out. I'd rather do something else. Several other settings that can cause this phenomenon are a new environment, so new job, new house, let's say you have to move to a whole new like town or something like that. That could cause that problem. It's a whole new environment. Like previously mentioned, a whole new academic setting. The workplace can cause this. That goes back to getting a new task that you've never done before, or them expecting you to know something or learn something that you've never done before, and you're like, oh, this is it. They're going to catch me. I don't know what I'm doing. Social interactions, definitely social interactions. You might be interacting with somebody and you think it's on the surface, it could be going really well, right? And then that imposter phenomenon's like, hey, they don't really like you, right? And they know that you're like, no fun. They know that you're not a person that they want to be with. You know what I mean? Like, or they want to hang out with. It's like you just self-sabotaging yourself. And then it says relationships as well, whether they're platonic or romantic. I think that's the same as the social interactions that I just talked about. Same devil on the shoulder, kind of thing. So it comes down to, in the relationship part, it comes down to the person suffering from the imposter syndrome. It just feels like they're not living up to the expectations of their friends or loved ones. So they just feel like they're a fraud in that relationship, even though if it's not true, and there's plenty of evidence externally that they are more than living up to the expectations. But it's just that, again, devil on the shoulder. So they just feel unworthy or not deserving of the benefits of that relationship. So there's studies have shown that there's harmful effects on students when they suffer from the imposter syndrome. It says that studies have shown that when a student's academic self-concept increases, the symptoms of the imposter syndrome decrease, and vice versa. So that's a perfect example of what happened to me. The worry and emotions that the student held had a direct impact on their performance in the program. Absolutely. The worry I had about not being good enough or not being smart enough, that imposter telling me that I was a fraud, is what had a direct impact on my performance in the program. And when that was gone later on, when I moved back to school and I felt that I could do it and that imposter was wrong, I actually did really well. So, and now I have a career, doing computer science. So it just goes to show you that this imposter syndrome is it's not always just a fleeting feeling of being a fraud. It has real, like, tangible, empirical harm that can happen if you don't address it. So they say that, for the students, a common facet of imposter syndrome in a classroom would be like stuff like the student is comparing themselves to their classmates, and that causes the imposter syndrome because the classmates doing so much better than them. Students did not feel prepared academically when comparing themselves to their classmates. I definitely felt that. My roommates at the time were very smart mathematically, and they had tested in a little higher than I did, and they were doing really well, and I was having a really hard time in some of the math categories, and I wasn't quite sure where to get help. Um, Students often question the grounds on which they were accepted into the program. Absolutely, I felt like that. I was like, how did I even get in here? Matter of fact, it didn't help. Like I said before, when I went to community college, there was one class that I did really bad in. Strangely enough, I did bad in the lecture portion, but I did great in the lab section, which I don't understand how that's possible. Because if I really don't understand the material, like the lecture part contends, then how did I do so well in the lab? And they were taught by two different teachers. So that's part of what makes me feel like there was a little bit of teacher uh, influence there. But I remember originally I did not want to do computer science. My original goal going to school was I wanted to get into medical. Um, but when I met with the counselors and like kind of program guidance people at the university when I was applying, they saw literally one class that I had done bad in and just straight up told me in my face, "You will never get into the medical school here." And I was like, just felt defeated. I was like, what was the point then? What was the point of any of the stuff I've done then? And at the time, I hadn't even really thought about computer science, and I was like, well, I need to find a different program. So I went to like the pre-computer science program basically there because I was like, well, I guess I like computers. Um, but that was not my original goal at all. And that just added to this idea of questioning the grounds on which I was even accepted into the program. Um, so um, the students perceived that positive recognitions, awards, and good grades stemmed from external factors, not from personal ability or intelligence. So basically, they're like, well, I got lucky, or I just guessed right, or stuff like that. So all of these add to this imposter syndrome, and it's just like really destructive. I know from personal experience, it's just I think that imposter syndrome just ruined my first attempt at university level stuff. It wasn't until probably a good, I want to say it was 6 to 7 years later where I was like, I think I want to go back. Um, so um, it did some damage as far as like career and where I could have been and where what I would have done differently. Um, just by self-sabotaging myself like that, not intentionally self-sabotaging, but that psychological feeling of feeling like you're a fraud, so you don't even try anymore. You're just like, well, I better just cut my losses now. So um interestingly enough, the research has shown that there's a relationship between imposter syndromes and a couple of different factors. And I'm just going to read them real quick. I'm not going to go into detail about these, but things that can feed into this imposter syndrome are like family expectations, overprotective parents or legal guardians. Graduate level coursework, or in my case, undergraduate level coursework, when I failed miserably there, like, and it was like, I'm out. Racial identities, attribution style, anxiety, depression, low trait self-esteem, perfectionism. If you're a perfectionist, you just are piling on yourself if you're not perfect. And excessive self-monitoring with an emphasis on self-worth. Those are all things that kind of feed this imposter syndrome idea. They're all factors, but the following things are examples of common notions that lead feeling guilt and reinforcing this phenomenon. They're telling themselves like, well, the good education they were able to receive you know uh, should mitigate these fears, right? Or being acknowledged by others for success, um, belief that it is not right or fair to be in a better situation than a friend or loved one might cause some of this imposter syndrome. Um, you know, being referred to as the smart one or the talented one or the good one or our favorite, it puts a lot of expectations on you, and then when you fail them, you run into this imposter syndrome idea. So it's about framing things right, and that's one thing that they talk about when they're talking about how to battle this imposter syndrome feeling. Um, and so they offer a few ideas in this like 2013 paper by Quena Huang, that the intrinsic motivation can decrease the feelings of being a fraud that are common. Um, and so you're reframing ideas to kind of put a positive spin on things or a different spin on things so that it doesn't feed into that imposter syndrome idea. So some examples that they give. I want to receive that degree. I won't give up and have too much pride to walk away. So um, another one is, if I can do this, I'll be able to help others in the future and work with people as motivated as I am. Um, I know I can do this. Learning how to be your own person, learning how to accept and believe compliments. So they're really just reframing what it means to approach these questions, or like in my case, let me think about this for a second. Instead of being like, I'm not smart enough to figure this out, I'm a fraud, I'd reframe it to being like, how can I learn this material to be more successful for a particular goal, or I guess or differently, I like telling myself I know I can do this, and it's a lot of like self affirmation kind of things. But it's an interesting concept, and I wanted to bring it up because I don't want people to doubt themselves in as part of this like human betterment project. Like, I think this is a feeling that probably the majority of people have felt at times, and they may not even realize that it's like self-doubt or like beating yourself up or anything, and it's a real psychological phenomenon that happens to people, and apparently a very large amount of people, because it was something like 70%, and it hit all demographics, um, so it's not an uncommon feeling at all, but don't let it sabotage you to do the things you want to do, like it did me back when I was in university. And I don't allow it to do that now. Like I said, IT is a very like evolving, cutting edge, like um, profession to be in, and it's easy to fall into that doubt of like, I don't know how I got here. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, you would think that, I mean, I've been in it for like 12 years now. You think you would eventually be like, I am confident in my abilities. But there's always a part of you that's like, oh no, there's this new technology that came out. I have no idea what they're talking about, and I don't have the time to study that because there's a million different things to study. That's okay. Like, you don't necessarily need to know that, and you probably are accomplished enough in the field that you're in to apply those lessons that you know from there to this new thing. If you needed to know that new technology, if you needed to know that new like programming language or something like that, you could probably figure it out. But just because you don't know it, or don't know it at the time that it's first brought up, doesn't mean that you can't do it, and you shouldn't doubt yourself like that. That's just the devil on the shoulder. Like, the devil on the shoulder is imposter syndrome, telling you you're not good enough, and that you're not who you are. Like, because your accolades and your, like, for lack of a better word, resume, and your accomplishments and your schooling and achievements in life and stuff are more than enough to back up who you are. and but that devil on the shoulder is like, don't even look at those, don't do it, like, so you need to find a way to reaffirm yourself and tell yourself that you are not a fraud, you are good enough, and that you can accomplish that task, and you have the evidence to show that you've done it in the past and that you will continue to do it. So um, I just find this to be a really interesting phenomenon, and I wanted to talk about it with you guys because like I said, I don't want you to doubt yourself, and I want you to do cool things. So when you have that doubt, just remember you are not the imposter. So accomplish that thing, do that thing that you want, like achieve that thing that you're reaching for. Don't let others or yourself especially tell you you can't do it. So that's all I want to say about that. This might have been a little bit of a rambling thing because it's really hard to research this particular topic. But I just want everybody out there to succeed at whatever their goal is, whether that's a academic goal, personal goal, fitness goal, mental goal, whatever it is. I want you guys to be successful. So do not let that devil on the shoulder tell you otherwise. You can do it, and you need to reframe that what that imposter is telling you into something positive that you can do. You can do this. You can be your own person, and you need to accept the compliments and the achievements that you've received in the past to propel you forward, because they know the external factors show what you're capable of. So keep doing that. So have a great one, everybody, and keep watching the show. Like and subscribe. I want to keep making this show more interesting and more dynamic, but I can't do that without you. So please like and subscribe, because it will help to make this show more interesting, more dynamic, maybe on location things. Who knows? I've got a lot of ideas, but I need your help to do them. So thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.